Thank you very much for attending today. Sorry we had some technical difficulties there at the very beginning, but we wanted to invite you to our safety audits and assessment webinar. My name is Doug Sully with Sully Safety Services based out of Mississauga, and I have Ray Snow with HeartZap Safety Training and Equipment. We are running these joint webinars here to provide some information and some tips that you can use within your own workplaces. So today we're going to talk about audits and assessments. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them at the end. If you want to put them into the chat, or if you want to wait and we can unmute everybody at the end. So we're going to talk about some definitions. We'll go over employer responsibilities, the types of safety audits, as well as the types of safety assessments. So there are some minor differences between the two. So a safety audit evaluates the safety programs and practices within an organization, whereas a safety assessment is a systematic procedure for identifying and managing hazards. It encompasses a thorough examination of the entire work environment, processes, and equipment to determine any hazard to the health of the employees in the short or long term, and to implement remedies to correct and control those hazards and protect workers. In many cases, you may hear these two words, assessment and audit, interchangeable. There are some minor differences. An audit kind of looks more at a specific area, whereas an assessment can be a little more generalized, especially when you look at something such as a hazard assessment. So the purpose of an audit is to maintain a safe place of work through hazard recognition and removal. You need to also purpose is to verify employees are following the most effective safety procedures. You need to make certain the facility, equipment, and operations meet the required local, provincial, and federal health and safety requirements. And the goal is to strive for a safer workplace that complies with all regulations and standards. Employers that are conducting an audit should measure and collect the information about a safety program's reliability and effectiveness, look at whether a safety program meets the company's stated goals, and examine safety training to ensure and make sure that you have proper response efforts in place. Safety audits can be done internally, but they are usually done by a third party. The third party also provides you with a unbiased view where they're looking at everything very objectively instead of subjectively in the workplace. Safety assessments, on the other hand, will evaluate and remove the hazard or minimize the level of its risk by adding control measures as necessary. This promotes employee awareness regarding workplace hazards, aids in identifying personnel at risk, determines the existing control measures and their adequacy, prevents injuries and illnesses, and prioritizes hazards and their control measures. Safety risk assessments will usually be completed at the beginning of any new project, when a new or renovated machine or a new or an amended process is being implemented, when a machine is being relocated, any new employees are being appointed to the task, any introduction of new raw materials, or receipt of new information about the product. The stages include identifying the hazard, collecting information and analyzing the risk associated with that hazard, and then determining how to remove or reduce its effect, whether it's eliminating the process or equipment, replacement with a better equipment or process, or using advanced technology or design, physically isolating processes, or direct contact of the user through PPE. So as an employer, the employer basically has to take all reasonable precautions to protect the health and safety of the workers from illness and injury. They can do this through audits and assessments, which will help keep a safe and well-maintained workplace, provide information about the hazards in the workplace, proper safety equipment, training, and competent supervision. And finally, they ensure they review all health and safety manuals and information in the workplace on a regular basis. So these are some of the requirements found in Section 25, which are the employer responsibilities in the Health and Safety Act. So let's get into some of the different types of safety audits. You have some general types, which kind of audit your entire program as a whole. WSIB work well. This is an audit and a template that I actually use quite a bit when I am doing audits for clients. And you also have the certificate of recognition, which is CORE. CORE is very, very much in the construction industry. However, larger businesses and industries are starting to use CORE as a guideline for developing their health and safety programs. Not only do you have your general ones, but you do have specific areas within your program. Audits can be done on your PPE requirements and measures, inspections and hazards, and making sure your inspections are being done, incidents and accidents, WMIS program, making sure there's an audit done on your WMIS program, your training program through a needs review, and your safety materials and posting requirements. It's also a smaller scale audit that you can do within your workplace. So the WSIB Workwell audit is offered through the WSIB. However, most workplaces will have access to the template and scorecard. This reviews all aspects of the workplace health and safety, including policy standards, training records, performance, and employee representation. It reviews the entire program and system against a defined scorecard and methodology, reviews all components, and provides a score through observation, information, and documentation. And each item that you go through will either receive a pass, a partial mark, or a fail. The purpose of the audit is to help determine compliance with the current health and safety measures and standards in Ontario, but also it helps you determine whether your current company policies are actually being followed. This is where the observation and information comes in, where you can actually review and you can actually observe to determine whether your workers are actually following the policies and procedures you put into place. Like I said, this is an audit that I will do on a regular basis. It's a good guideline that can be used in these circumstances. The Certificate of Recognition, or CORE, is a nationally trademarked and endorsed by the Canadian Federation of Construction Safety Associations. In Ontario, IHSA is the only member that is permitted to issue the CORE certification. The bulk of the firms that try to achieve this are in the construction industry, but it's also moving to major business sectors. This certification provides employers with an effective tool to assess their health and safety management system. It reviews the entire program and system against a defined scorecard and methodology, reviews all components, and provides the score through, again, observation, information, and documentation. However, in this instance, each item will receive a pass or a fail. There is no halfway on those. CORE is usually a lot of the larger businesses and a larger in the construction industry will attempt to achieve their CORE. There are renewal requirements and it's more of a membership and certification as well. However, the actual audit is similar to the WSIB Workwell audit in many respects. So with some of the general ones, there are also specific ones that they don't take as long and they focus on specific areas within your health and safety program. One of the ones that is important is to make sure you do a PPE audit. This checks your requirements and compliance with the PPE legislation and requirements for the workplace. What you'll do is you'll do a check on the legislation, standards, guidelines, and company requirements that you currently have in place. Then check your workers to make sure that they're doing it properly, making sure they're following the requirements. The idea with your audit is to determine any concerns or gaps that you may find in compliance and determine your corrective actions. Inspection audits will check inspection program components and requirements for compliance. This includes your schedules, your forms, your actual documentation and completed inspections. It also makes sure it checks it against the legislation, standards, guidelines, and company requirements. You can actually pick specific components of an inspection program to do the audit on. This could be your hazard corrections, making sure your hazards are being corrected, worker observations, daily inspections on equipment, machine inspections, work area, or making sure that if you have specific responsibilities for inspections, that the people that are responsible are completing those inspections. Your incidents and accidents audit will check the specific requirements and compliance. This makes sure that one, you have documented records for any incident that occurs. Not only do you have to investigate fatalities and critical injuries, you also need to investigate non-critical injuries, as well as any sort of situation that could potentially lead to a serious accident. This is what they call near misses. You want to make sure the records are complete, you have a proper form that's being used, making sure there are reporting requirements, including externally, but also within your workplace to your health and safety rep or joint health and safety committee, making sure that those are being done. Determine your concerns and gaps and determine corrective actions. You can do this over a long period of time, whether it's a year, whether it's the entire program, or you can do this on a regular basis and pick, say, a 6-month or 3-month period. Either way is fine. I usually will do a 6-month with my clients. Is I'll work with them and I'll be doing a 6-month review of all the incidents that may occur just to make sure. It kind of helps keep it fresh and keep on top of things. WMIS audits are important as well. WMIS audits will involve making sure that you're checking your safety data sheets, making sure you're checking your training, making sure your policies, labels are all following the current legislation standards and guidelines. Making sure that training is up to date. Many people will say either their employees don't need to have WMIS training, or WMIS training was done, so it doesn't have to be done again. You need to do your WMIS training every year. And if you can't successfully explain to an inspector that a person doesn't need WMIS training, then you should make sure they're trained. Labels, you want to make sure labels fall under the current guidelines, making sure safety data sheets are available for every single product. This will be using a chemical inventory list to help you do this. And obviously, you want to make sure you determine any concerns or gaps in corrective actions. This also helps you maintain chemical inventories and information. As we do get busy, sometimes some of these things can fall to the wayside, but doing regular audits on the WMIS program helps to make sure that you have up-to-date records and information. Your training program audits will check training requirements for the workplace. They'll check the legislation, standards, and guidelines. They'll also check current records to make sure everything is up to date. Some training is required to be done every year. Other training can be spread out over a couple of years, and in some cases, training only needs to be done once. Just checking your training records to make sure they're up to date is not the only part of this audit. You do need to make sure you're checking for any changes to legislation to make sure that you have all of your topics covered. Determine your concerns and gaps and determine corrective actions. You can do this on the entire program, but you can do it based on a specific topic or hazard within the workplace. An example of this could be confined spaces. It could be masks and respirator protection. It could even be lift trucks. It could also be tools and equipment. And in some cases, it could even be radiology and certain chemicals and hazards that are specific to your workplace. Finally, your specific material or posting audits. This will check your documentation and records and posting requirements. So this has more to do, this is a pretty quick one. This usually has more to do with your health and safety board, checking your posters within the workplace that are required, checking to make sure you have records for inspections and incidents and training, making sure the records are easily available. This one is pretty simple. If you do see any concerns or gaps, it's usually something that can be corrected pretty quickly. So I would do this probably during a normal workplace inspection because it is such a quick check. So now we've talked about some audits. So let's talk about assessments here. So there are some different types. There are other types that won't be included here, but I have concentrated on three. Your general hazard assessment, your designated substances, and pre-start health and safety reviews. So with regards to the hazard assessment, Section 25 of the Health and Safety Act requires the employer to ensure that they have assessed all hazards in the workplace and provide control measures and train workers on those control measures. A hazard is anything in the workplace that can harm or kill a worker. Hazards must be recognized, assessed, and controlled to protect the workers. Hazards will fall under five categories, whether it's people, equipment, material, environment, or process. And control measures must follow the hierarchy of controls, which includes elimination of the hazard, substituting the chemical or substance with a non-toxic substance, engineering, which could be ventilation, setting up barriers, administrative could be adjusting work schedules to reduce the exposure to the hazard, and finally PPE, which is your last line of defense and is not the only thing that you need to consider. So the hazard assessment is a process that is used to identify, assess, and control your workplace hazards. You identify hazards that have the potential to cause harm through hazard identification. This can be done through inspections, observations, reviewing records, reviewing legislation to determine the types of hazards. Observing someone as they do their job is definitely a way that you can help conduct a proper hazard assessment as well, documenting those steps that each worker has to take. Determine the risk, including the frequency and severity and probability of reoccurrence. So it's important to make sure that once you've recognized your hazards or identified them, you determine the frequency, severity, and probability of reoccurrence. So this falls under major, moderate, and minor hazards. Major hazards must have significant controls set up immediately. Moderate hazards also required to have controls, and many minor hazards could be something as simple as cleaning up a spill that's happened at one specific time, and that will be a simple control in that place. Once you've determined your risk, you determine the ways to eliminate the hazard, and you use the hierarchy of control that we went over on the last slide. A proper control measure is a measure that incorporates multiple steps within that hierarchy of control. Ideally, we want to eliminate all hazards. However, this is not always possible. You do want to try to substitute when you can. However, that's not always possible as well. So implementing engineering measures, administrative controls, or even PPE, or all of the above is a great way to develop a proper control program for a specific hazard in the workplace. Hazard assessments can be general for the entire workplace, but they can also be specific to the task or job or site and facility. From these, you develop your control measures and safe operating procedures to eliminate or reduce the hazards. You need to make sure you check legislation and regulations, guidelines, and standards. You do need to make sure it's also company specific, and you should also set up evaluation methods to make sure you can evaluate the controls to see if they work. If you set up control methods and then don't do anything after, if the control method is not working, then you need to determine why it's not working and develop an additional control or change it up. So designated substance is a biological, chemical, or physical agent or combination considered so hazardous that the worker exposed is prohibited, regulated, restricted, limited, or controlled. So there's 11 substances that fall under the regulation, which is regulation 49009. The substances include acrylonitrile, arsenic, asbestos, benzene, coke oven emissions, ethylene oxide, isocyanates, lead, mercury, silica, and vinyl chloride. So in order to determine, the first thing you have to do is determine if you have any of these substances in your workplace. And in order to do that, you need to check the safety data sheets for the chemicals that you're using. You need to check section 3, which is the information on ingredients. And you need to determine if any of these chemicals that are listed in the regulation are found within the chemical. If they are, you need to identify, assess, and control the hazards and risks to worker health and safety that are specific to the designated substances. This could include information found in the safety data sheet, but it also needs to include specific workplace measures. And you should always make sure that you consult with your joint health and safety committee. If you have a designated substance in the workplace, you are required, regardless of the number of workers, to have a joint health and safety committee in place. And finally, your pre-start health and safety reviews. So the employer is required to ensure the apparatus, structure, protective element, or process complies with Regulation 851, Section 7. These are the pre-start health and safety review requirements. This includes a new apparatus, structure, or protective element that is to be constructed, added, or installed, or a new process that is to be used, or an existing apparatus, structure, protective element, or process is to be modified, and one of the following steps must be taken to attain compliance with the applicable provision. Whether it's a new or modified engineering control used, other new or modified measures are used, or a combination of new, existing, or modified engineering controls and other new or modified measures are used. Pre-start health and safety reviews are done prior to actually using the machine. They help determine what control measures need to be put into place in order to ensure the machine is operated safely and workers are safe while operating the machine. It is very cost effective in the sense that it is proactive and you're not having to spend the money if something happens down the line. Doing it ahead of time and making sure that it's done and training your workers helps prevent workplace injuries and illnesses. So what you do is you determine the requirements based on the table in Section 7 of Regulation 851. If the circumstance in the table apply, the pre-start health and safety review is required. This is normally completed by a professional engineer or a competent person. There are some exceptions that will be listed in the table in Section 7. However, if you do fall under an exemption, you will need to have conformance documents in place and readily available upon inspection. A pre-start health and safety review includes a written report that outlines all the areas of non-compliance and the measures necessary to achieve compliance, including steps, actions, or engineering controls as required by the regulation. So with regards to your audits and with regards to your assessments, there always will be that report that provides you a detail of what you found and then what needs to be done and how to do it. So it's important to make sure that not only do you create your report when you're doing your audit, you also make sure you have your recommendations and you have an action plan. Action plans are one of the most important things as it provides you with this snapshot of what it is that still needs to be done. And as you update your action plan as things are completed, this helps you determine what is still outstanding, but it also provides you with that document to show that you are continuously reviewing your health and safety program. So other types of assessments that may also be done include noise assessments. This can be done when there's machines or activities that cause significant amount of noise and workers are exposed to that noise. Confined space assessments, these are done based on confined spaces in the workplace. And your respiratory program assessments are also assessments that are done based on chemicals within the workplace and proper respiratory protection that may be needed. So I know that was a lot of information in probably a fairly quick order. If you do have any questions, if you'd like to reach out about further information for your audits and assessments, we've provided our contact information here. You can reach me at by phone or email, or you can reach Ray as well by phone and email or through our websites listed. And if you haven't started to follow us on social media, please do, as we provide tips and tricks for workplaces to help make sure that they can remain compliant.